Turning to some other issues on the agenda, let's look now at the 1987 budget, the good news and the bad news. If you can find good news, you've done a better job than I have this year. Basically, as you know, the President put it forth last year, last week. The fiscal year 1987 budget is a budget totaling $994 billion. Those include some domestic cuts in order to reach that over current levels of spending. Domestic cuts would account for $31.9 billion, and health care program cuts would amount of the $31.9 billion to a total of $8 billion. Looking at some of the specifics of the health cuts, where does that $8 billion come from? Well, $5.2 billion of it comes from Medicare, $1.4 billion comes from Medicaid, $600 million comes from the Public Health Service, and other parts of the health budget account for $800 million to make the total of $8 billion. Looking a little further at Medicare, because that seems to be where we get most of our sustenance these days, capital payments amount for $456 million. Education reimbursement, both direct and indirect, is $1.6 billion of the total cut. Physician payments, $432 million, and beneficiary payments. That includes both co-payments and deductibles, and increases in Part B premiums would account for $1.58 billion of the total. There are some other areas, but those are basically the major areas that would be accounted for under the President's budget. It is, as they say, a very austere budget. Some have pronounced it dead on arrival, but I will tell you, fewer have pronounced it dead on arrival this year than they did last year. And the reality of it is that with Graham-Rudman haulings, something has to be done to meet the legislatively mandated requirements. The President has submitted his proposal, and now it will be up to the Congress to either accept or dispose or change or whatever. But overlaying all of that, of course, is this is the budget for 1987. What we're really talking about this year, because we still don't know what we're going to get paid, is what happens in fiscal year 1986. Now, as you will recall, in 1986 October, when this thing started, the budget was delayed. The reconciliation was delayed, and it was delayed first until November 15th and then until December 11th to try to have the Congress work together, the two houses, to try to come up with a proposal. At my last update, I went into some detail about the differing versions that came out between the House and the Senate on the reconciliation package, which would include for us those operating provisions for this year. Subsequent to that, both houses met in conference and basically agreed on a reconciliation package, which at the last minute was held up because there were some provisions in there that the President, frankly, threatened to veto. So what they did was delay reconciliation until early March and pass a bill delaying the implementation of the administration's regulations until March 15th. But let's just review briefly for you what the reconciliation package, if it were as the House has and Senate agreed on, if it were to be enacted early next month. What it would do would extend the deadline of effectiveness until March 15th. There would be a 1% increase in hospital reimbursement. There would be a delay in the transition to a national rate from what is supposed to be 60 national, 40%, or I'm sorry, what is supposed to be 75% national, 25% hospital specific, to a transition that would take effect on March 15th of 55% national and 45% hospital specific for this fiscal year. The wage index that was mandated over a year ago and was submitted last summer would not be made retroactive. Under existing law, changes in reimbursement based on the wage index has to be made retroactive to October of 1986. Graduate medical reimbursement would be increased by 1% under the House-Senate Reconciliation Act. Indirect education reimbursement would be reduced from 11.79% to 8.1%. There would be other elements. There is a provision on disproportionate share. There's another one phasing out return on investment for the investor owns under capital. There are some very unpleasant, to say the least, anti-dumping penalties. And there is a physician fee increase that would freeze physician fees at the current level, at actually the 1985 level, unless they agreed to accept assignment, in which case they would receive a 4.1% increase.